If you're a fan of horror and you're also a fan of getting to know an up-and-coming author, then today's video just might be for you. Today, I will be doing an interview with Ben Farthing. Welcome to Spencer Reads Everything. I'm your host, Spencer Duncan, and today I have an interview with a good friend of mine, Ben Farthing, over his books, especially his interest in the genre of horror, but also a longer discussion about how he approaches writing, the challenges that he has with writing, and what it's like to be a full-time author. Now, I apologize in advance. I did this interview on campus, and I had an awful green colored screen behind me, but otherwise, please enjoy this interview. Welcome to Spencer Reads Everything. This is my first interview. This is with a friend of mine, Ben Farthing, who is an up-and-coming horror author. He is a fellow native of Richmond, Virginia, just like myself. He graduated from William & Mary with a degree in English.
Yeah, it was in English.
And BYU with a master's in creative writing or
Master's in Fine Arts and
fine arts. Okay.
creative writing. Yeah.
Okay. He has to his name already. Oh my goodness. You have two series. So you have the I Found Horror series, which you have 5 books currently. You have the Horror Lurks Beneath series, which has 3 books already. You have at least 2 standalones, Piper's Graveyard and The Boom. Question
Yeah, that's
is,
been retitled to Those Who Dwell Below the Sidewalk, but yeah.
that was my question. So because I own Boom and I keep seeing the other one pop up instead. And then you have, of course, the collection of short stories. So you have quite a few things under your belt. And of course, the really big thing is that in just the last couple months, you have had enough success that you've been able to finally quit your day job and pursue writing full time, something that I'm sure you've always wanted to do.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we'll save that to the end. We'll discuss
Okay.
the transition to the end. Let me first ask a few basic questions about writing. Well, for starters, you have focused entirely on horror. I know you personally. We've been friends for about a decade. I know you have a lot of interest. Why horror, though? And do you think this is going to be the only genre that you write in, invest in, or do you
Yeah.
have
So
interest in?
right now, I'd say the answer to that second question is yes. Yeah. Horror is where I'm going to stay. Um, when I started like handling publishing myself and was like, all right, let me learn the marketing side of this and get my work out there myself. I joined a couple like fantasy book Facebook groups and a couple horror book Facebook groups. And as I was like scrolling down Facebook, I kept seeing this fantasy book stuff like clog my feed. And I was like, I don't want to look at this. And I was like, okay, yeah, no, I'm a little bored of writing fantasy for now. I still read it, but so yeah, I just kind of like I've always been into horror, but I wrote 2 novels and 50 short stories before I um, really got into writing horror. I'm not sure why that was, but once I did finally say, "Oh, here's a horror book I want to write," the first book that's like 100% horror that I wrote, really dove into, was The Piper's Graveyard,
Mhm.
and it's a 85,000 word novel, which is like just a tad over average for a novel length. Um, and I wrote the first draft in like a few months while I was working full time. Like nothing's ever flown out of me that fast before.
Oh, okay.
So it was just like, yeah, this is where I'm comfortable. This is what I like doing.
Okay. I mean, you can't complain with that, especially seeing how much you've been able to produce in a relatively short time. I mean, when we first met, you hadn't published anything yet. You had one novel you had written that, like you said, was not even a horror novel.
Yeah.
I think I have that on a Google Drive somewhere still.
Oh, okay.
Um, uh, and so you just started publishing 5, 6 years ago, or what?
Yeah, I think 5 years ago,
Okay.
maybe 4 or 5 years ago. Yeah.
And I already,
Um,
named off how many you've done in that time. So I can't argue with the productivity that you've managed, which brings me to the question, how have you managed to write so much while you were working full time?
it kind of comes down to just like making it a priority, I
Mhm.
guess. And I've never been good at like working super long days, no matter what it is. But I
Okay.
have always been good at like, but then I'll start again tomorrow, start again tomorrow, start again tomorrow. And so like I might not write more than on a bad day when I was working full time, I might not write more than a few hundred words in a day, but I was also going to do it tomorrow and the next day and the next day and the next day. Um, and so, yeah, I mean, it adds up. And then you get in the habit of that, and then you have more good days than bad days, and then you're writing, 1,000 words in 90 minutes of work or something. So,
So you have more good days than bad days, but do you ever struggle even coming up with ideas? I mean, obviously, I think writer's block can be just a day-to-day thing, but are you ever, do you have problems on an even larger scale while you're trying to think up what the next storyline would be? I mean, you have those two big series, so simply having a theme, I think, can go a long ways, but I don't know how it is for you.
yeah, so, well, The Horror Lurks Beneath, the three full-length novels, that's mostly done. I mean, it's done. It's a trilogy.
Oh, okay.
I set it up so I could continue it if I wanted to, but I think if I did that, I would start a new trilogy. It would be like a sequel trilogy.
Mhm.
Anyways, yeah, so I've got, 1,000 ideas. I'll never run out of like core ideas for a book. But where I do, so I run into fewer like things you could call writer's block now than I used to, because I know like in my situation, usually it's either like a bad person or a creepy environment that's driving the story. And so if I make sure that I know the bad guy's motivation and what he's trying to do, or if I make sure I know like the weird locations, like purpose, how it got there, what it's doing, what it wants. If I know all those things and know like the character's emotional arc, then I don't get stuck too often. So I can just write and have this character confront the bad guy or confront the weird situation and keep throwing themselves against it until you get the dramatic ski slopes up and down until the tension's so high, then the book ends. So I've gotten stuck not knowing those things enough times that now I'm like, okay, if I have those down, then I can write start to finish mostly. I do still sometimes find myself like recently, like with the new book I'm writing, I find myself like, okay, I've got this whole book in my head. I've written the first quarter of it or something, but I know that like I want there to be mystery until the very end. Like I usually bounce pretty hard off of horror when it's just surviving some dude with a knife, or even if it's like monster and supernatural, it's like, well, halfway through we know what it is, and now we're just trying to survive it. No, I get bored from that. So, so in my current book, I sort of wrote myself into that of like, well, it's going to be revealed what's going on, and now they're gonna have to figure out how to like trap it where it is. And I'm like, well, I'm not really happy with that. I want the reading experience to be like, what the heck's going on all the way until the last chapter.
Is that a big part of how you came to create the I Found Horror series? I mean, I could see how that desire to keep that mystery element in these novellas would be much easier for to, I found particularly in, I found puppets, what is it, living in my apartment walls.
Yeah,
From the beginning, you have excitement, but you're right. You also clearly have information you need to find out, and you don't get it all until the very end. And that's very easy when it's, 90, 100 pages or however long the book is.
yeah.
I mean, is that something that helped contribute to that? And I guess I just want to know a little bit more about that series in general, because it seems to be the thing that is giving you, you know, um, a lot of material.
So yeah, those books definitely lend themselves well. I mean, they're all about the like dark discovery, somebody called it today. Like the a horror plot around discovery, usually for the character themselves, definitely always for the reader, of like discovering either what's happening, and once we start to kind of figure it out, what's happening, then like why is it happening? What do they want? Like, um, what are the implications going to be? And I think the novella, that length of 100, pages, definitely lends itself well to tell that kind of story. Like all the I found horror books have been between 100 and 150 pages. There's something about like the novella that's just like the perfect length for telling a horror story, because the short story is great, but you kind of almost have to choose between like exploring whatever horror element you have and then like really diving into a character, because there's just only so many words you can use. And um, of course there's counterexamples. There's lots of stories that manage to do it, but it's a lot harder in 7,500 words or less, as opposed to 30,000 words in a novella, where you're able to take just like the core heart of what would be a novel, just say we're going to focus on this character, like what they're dealing with in this moment, what emotional like devastation they're going through, and I want to focus on like this horror premise, this horror idea that excites me, and that's all that's in this story. I mean, there are other pieces, but they're off to the side.
Mhm.
They're pushing this along, and like that's it. So the novella, I think, just works great for horror. Sometimes I do also wonder if it's like if you turned a screenplay into fiction, it would probably be about novella length. So I do kind of wonder if I'm like,
Yeah,
is this just movie length in my head? Is that what I'm doing?
so I'm reading Shawshank Redemption right now, and I mean I don't know, it's like maybe 150 pages. I mean it's not very long, and of course it actually follows the screenplay. Well, I guess the screenplay follows
Yeah.
the book quite well, which leads me to believe that this is the approach we should have with movies, and you know we should be looking for the novella length. Um, so I guess my follow-up question to that is you know, with that approach, was that something that had always interested you? I mean, I don't know enough about the horror genre as a whole. Is that a common way to approach horrors with novellas, or was it just something that kind of grew out of, you know, the circumstances of just writing on the side? Or you mentioned, you know, having the constraints also adds this challenge of trying to do it succinctly and you know instead of exploring characters. So you know, was this also just something you had wanted to try?
The novel length, I mean the novella length or
Yeah,
the
the
like
novella length. Because you had put out uh, what
five,
five
yeah,
full
five
length
full-length
before you
novels
did a
before
novella?
I found a circus tent. Um, so with that one, I'd had this image in my head of a red and yellow circus tent in the woods, and just had it like written down in my idea notebook. And then eventually, one morning, that laying in bed, like the title just jumped into my head, and a bit of the story did. And I was like, I'm gonna do this. I was in the middle of like writing a longer book, and so my thought process there was like, I'm just gonna take a break from this longer book. I'm gonna write this short thing and publish it and see, because I think this is a cool idea. I think people will like it. I think I'll have fun writing it. I think I'll be able to like create a reader experience that I'm proud of. Um, and so I went for it. If you watch weird 80s horror movies, then you know that the circus tent in the woods image comes from Killer Clowns from Outer Space. But I
Yes.
had forgotten that at the time. I'm sure that's where I got the idea from. My story takes place almost entirely inside the tent, and there's no aliens. Probably. So, so I wrote that first one, and then I went back to writing this longer book, and that book started to do decently well, like better than anything I'd written before. And then I had another nightmare about puppets um, in my closet looking at me, and so I was like, I'd always joked or half seriously, completely seriously, but also made jokes about writing a book that would get people to be as afraid of Muppets as I am, and like never really had the plot in my head. And then the dream that I had was like a blue furry puppet staring at me from my closet, and like it had gotten there from somewhere, not from the door. It had gotten there, I guess, from inside the walls.
Yeah.
Um, and so that was like the last detail that I needed to for the idea for that story to blossom. And that one, yeah, I was like, I'm gonna see if I can make like a series of books that are just sort of like thematically and tonally similar, rather
Okay.
than maybe not even thematically, just like tonally similar. Um, and that have this, well, I guess thematic themes of like dark discovery, of discovering, of investigating something bizarre that quickly turns horrifying. And so I found puppets, and that one took off. That's how I've been able to go full time pretty much. Um,
Okay. The thing that I find appealing about those is not just because they're shorter, that I feel like the whole approach, the whole everything about them, the title of the book tells you so much more. It makes it easier for it to just be to immediately invoke so many more images and ideas. And it's very clearly horror. I mean, this idea of finding puppets, which you know, those in and of themselves can seem kind of silly, but just the way it's presented, you're like, oh yeah, this is this is going to be scary. This is going to be you know, more than just turning puppets into something scary, but dealing with a very real unease that a lot of people can have around puppets. I mean, I do. I think that I think that it's one of those fears that it's not far from a fear of clowns. Like it has a similar
yeah,
association. But again, going with your circus tent, all of the things, the titles immediately conjure up, I think, very real, if not fears, very real sentiments that people can acknowledge. Yeah, I do have a weird feeling about that sometimes. I have a certain unease. I am about to dig into your latest one, and I mean, I 100% think cribs are like just the I am constantly going under my daughter's crib to retrieve whatever pacifiers or whatever she's throwing. And there is just this like this eeriness about everything in some ways that you're like the unknown, and it's like so much worse than, you know, we're always afraid of monsters under the bed, but I feel it even more so with like a crib for some reason. I don't know, maybe because it's high. I don't know. But I feel like you've tapped into that really well. And I just think the whole approach with the novellas, it's so much easier to grasp like all of a sudden. And anyway, so maybe that's a little more of a marketing comment, but that's why I find them appealing. But looking at your other books, because I clearly you're going to keep writing other longer length books. Do you find them more challenging or less challenging to do despite the length? Because obviously I'm going to assume the novella simply being shorter makes it easier in some regards. But
It
like
does
you
usually
said,
make it easier, yeah. Um,
I also think the idea that you don't feel like you have to connect it to, you know, any other bigger series or
oh
anything like
yeah.
that. I think that really helps too with being able to really dig into those, but also finish them relatively quickly. But what other challenges do you find with the larger books, with the full-length novels versus the novellas?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is I get bored. Like I'm
Uh,
like, yeah, like two-thirds through, I'm like, I get it. Like I've had this cool idea in my head for, a year now. Like I've been excited about the next idea two or three times. Like
yeah.
I've already planned out several books in the future. Um,
Yeah, try writing a dissertation with that mindset. Yeah.
my, uh, my novel was well, thesis, I guess, not. I mean, novels have a lot more moving pieces. Like I was saying with a novella, at least the way I've been doing it is you've got like one character with like just like this emotional hardship they're already going through. And then they get to confront this horror element while also dealing with their like life issues. And so it's like a character study almost of like a single person smashed together with whatever cool horror ideas exciting me at the time. With a novel, that's still the core, that's still the central like spine of the book for me is like the core horror idea kind of paralleling what the main characters like emotional struggles are at the beginning and like character arc they're going to have to go through in the book. But then because it's usually something bigger, you got to bring in other characters and then they need their own arcs. And it's just a lot more pieces to juggle. I guess it's not too different. It's sort of squishing like a novella and a half together and then just juggling everything. You have there's so many more pieces in the air when like you want each chapter to feel how you want it to feel in terms of like pacing and mood. And so with so many more elements at play, it can be a lot harder to weave like the emotional experience you want to create chapter by chapter. But yeah, it's probably not too different. I've been writing these novellas now for a couple years, and right now I'm working on it'll be a shorter novel, but it'll be novel. And it is it is a lot more difficult where I'm like, okay, wait, I've got at least two characters who need to grow and change and confront things in different ways. And yeah, it's a different challenge to get back into a longer work after about 2 years of writing novellas.
So looking at I guess all your books, which one did you find the hardest to finish?
First comes to mind is the third book in the Horror Lurks Beneath trilogy is We Hide Our Faces, where I was like, I need to write a trilogy because that's how you publish books, because then you can advertise the first one. And I don't know. Um, so I didn't start writing it for the right reasons, or at least I didn't also have the right reasons. And then once I got into it, I was like, okay, I'm happy with this plot. I'm happy with these character arcs, and like I'm happy with the weird horror stuff that I get to explore. But then by the end, I was, I'd never written a third book in a series before. I had a bunch of characters from the earlier books, and I was like afraid to kill them off if I felt like they should be killed off. And um, I was trying to wrap up the story while also wrapping up like the trilogy in a sort of open way. And it was just a lot more pieces, a lot more moving pieces, and a lot of like, I'm bored of this. Um,
So are you wary of doing another trilogy?
yes.
Okay.
Yeah, as of right now, I don't have any plans for like sequels
Okay.
books.
All right. So,
Possibly a sequel to Puppets. A lot of people ask for it. I might do it as a serial on Patreon or something. I don't know.
oh,
I have an
okay.
idea for it that I do kind of like.
Well, it also stands alone. It's kind of a big thing in my head. I think chronologically came after Puppets, but I want it to stand alone as its own book too. I see what you're saying. Yeah. I was gonna say, well, it certainly has an ending which opens you up doing a lot more. But I'm very wary of horror sequels. I don't know if you've seen the movie Phantasm or its sequels, but Phantasm is just a nightmare of a movie. It feels like a nightmare, and you don't know what's going on. It's really weird. There's like a little bit of cosmic horror, some sci-fi horror. There's like little goblin things running around, and then the sequels. Now the guys get shotguns, and like it's just a lot of people like one or two of the sequels. I hate them all. I think they all make the first movie weaker. Because you start explaining things. They start like, well, here's the answer to that one. Here's the answer to that was. Like, no, 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 no. Like that was the experience of Phantasm One requires not knowing what that is.
And so for
Okay.
me, with like Puppets, there's some stuff that you learn about like the history of the TV show and the apartment building and the puppets, um, where well, the experience of reading that book is only knowing a little bit about it. Or like the ending, without giving away the ending too much. Like the experience of reading that book requires that that ending seems to start another story and then just ends.
Mhm.
Like that's what you're left with. And so for me to write a sequel that starts answering these questions, even answering, well, what happens next, is going to change the experience of that first book a little bit, even retroactively. And so I'm very cautious, very worried about doing that, just artistically. Financially, sure, I should do it, but like I don't know.
Yeah, well, I
Um,
mean, you would not be the first person that is faced with that, conundrum. I mean, every movie out there is subject to having an undesired sequel made at some point. I think we were talking once about The Giver, which like clearly has this ending of a bit is implied, but it is the end, like you're
yeah,
suggesting. And then she went on to write four more books in the series, and you're like, what? That
yeah,
doesn't make any sense. But I mean, we can name countless examples where a sequel was clearly a bit forced and was, uh, you know, like you
yeah,
said, was not artistically the most desired.
yeah. That's my worry, and it's not just like that. It's an artistically, I wouldn't be satisfied with it. It's that like it would take me forever to write it because I wouldn't enjoy it. Like I
Okay.
really have to enjoy what I'm writing, or it'll take me forever. So like,
So moving beyond the writing, though, I see that you also do a good deal of, marketing. You're at conventions a lot. Do you enjoy that part of it, or is this one of those things that you're like, I gotta pay my dues. I'm doing this, until I'm
well, those are at least two different questions. The
okay. Well,
conventions are a
take
lot
it.
of fun.
Okay.
I'm an introvert who's learned to be outgoing when I want to be, and so like I enjoy it a lot. I'm also very exhausted afterwards. Um, but I enjoy the in-person stuff. All the marketing. So my career before I, quit a few months ago was in internet marketing.
Mhm.
And so I have a background in like selling things online, although really just like one aspect. I have a background in like writing the sales pitch for things online, not so much running everything. And so I'm learning all these other aspects. And so I don't know. I mean, you enjoy it when it's going well. It's frustrating when you're like, why isn't this working? Like I thought this would work. Now I'm losing money on that ad or something. It's always hard to like, okay, I need to sit down and work on this for a couple hours. That like making myself do it is always pretty difficult just because it's like this is not going to be fun. And then I'll get into it and zone out and it'll be fine. And 3 hours later, I'm like, oh, I need to wrap up. No, make it like even talking to you now where I'm like after this call, I need to like check on some ads and
Yeah.
finish putting together this website. I'm just like, oh, I don't want to do that.
Yeah. Well, something else kind of related to that, although not quite in marketing, but just in terms of facilitating you writing, was building your writing cabin, which I don't know if you're
Yeah.
in any situation to show it off right now. I know this is something that, as a friend of yours on Facebook, the whole, internet, well, all your Facebook friends have really enjoyed seeing the progress on this. I don't
Um,
know.
I messed up my wireless router, so like I'm plugged in right now, but like here's part of it. So that's my back wall.
Yeah, that's a wood burning stove you got in there for,
Yeah, there's like
yeah.
this one company makes them like tiny home size,
Hmm.
so it doesn't burn me out too much. I mean, it still does. It gets super hot in here. I just open windows with that thing burning. And then my front wall, you can see my tripod where I was filming stupid TikToks. Um, I mean, not that TikTok is stupid. I made a purpose video is what I'm saying. Uh, Yeah, and then over here is still there's a ladder. Over here, the back wall is still and I've got a whole bunch of lumber on my garage floor. I'm gonna turn into a big bookshelf, but there's a few other house projects I really need to tackle for.
Yeah, your wife not loving all the all the attention it gets. But I mean, I think that's so cool. I think not just having a writing cabinet, but the idea that you built it yourself is really exciting.
Yeah,
Um,
it was very satisfying to do. Um, and I very much like to approach these sorts of things where I'm just like, I don't know how to do this whole next step, but I'm pretty sure I know how to do the first part of it. So I'm just going to do that. And then I'll look on YouTube and see what the next part is. Um, and then you just, undo things and do them again if you did them wrong, which happened a decent amount building this. I also built like a few things to like I built a playhouse for my kids that had like regularly framed walls so I could like frame a wall before I did it in here. So like I
yeah.
made some really dumb mistakes on the playhouse. So then in here I didn't make as many mistakes.
So I'm trying to think what other questions I've had about the whole process. I said I would save the transitioning to full time to the end. And I guess that's I want to know what all has it been like going from, a part-time author to full-time. We've already mentioned obviously the added stress of it having to support your family, but on top of that, I mean, like you mentioned with the possible sequel to the puppets, do you just feel more stress about possibly pursuing options that are more lucrative, or do you feel like it affects the artistic nature of them now that it can't just be a labor of love in the same way that it might have been originally?
Ask me again once and if my savings get closer to running out. Because right now I'm still like I got an offer to do, there's a guy who publishes this series called Try Not to Die, and it's pretty much horror choose your own adventures for adults.
Mhm.
And he was like, "Hey, if you want to do puppets, we can do that. I pay this much in advance, and then we write it together. You get half the royalties." Um, and I'm like, "That would like financially, like that'd be nice." I'm like, "I don't really want to do that right now." And so, like, yeah, if my books like drop in sales or something in a year, and I need the money, I'll probably do it. If the book's still popular enough by then. Um, but like to answer your question in general, so I mean, because I've worked in marketing for so long, I do kind of get excited when I'm like, oh, you know what, this idea might connect with a lot of people. And then I'm like more excited to write it. And so it's not so much that I'm like making myself write a book that I think will be popular that I don't care that much about. Because if that were the case, then I wouldn't write horror because it's got, a tenth the audience of like fantasy or something.
I suspect it's got to be a little easier to break in, though. I mean, I
In
have
some ways,
other
yeah.
friends that have written fantasy, and they're like, "My books make zero sales." I'm like, it's fantasy."
I mean, I don't know much about marketing fantasy. I don't know. Fantasy has, I mean, I am no expert because the fantasy I'm reading is still like early 2000s, thousand page fantasy war novels. Um, but from what I understand, it seems like fantasy has taken, or a big wing of fantasy has taken this like turn to like merge with popular fiction, like kind of popular mainstream, maybe a little bit of like romance, summer reads kind of thing, and merge together. And so like the value that people see in those is going to be emotional experience of like the relationships in the book, and maybe a little bit of like the action drama.
Well, let's get away from that then, seeing as
Okay.
though um, I'm probably not going to help myself, by going on too long about the most popular books in the world right now and things I don't like about them. But what I do want to know is well, I would like to know two things. The first one is what are your influences specifically in your type of writing? And then what are your interests and influences outside of your writing? So you've mentioned that you do still read, say, fantasy, and you referenced early 2000s war novels. Um, so those are my two questions. The first one is, uh, who would you say are your biggest influences for your style of writing?
It's hard to like name an author rather than books because I've sort of like almost just like latched on to this one sort of like dark discovery of let's investigate something creepy. Um,
Well, so let me rephrase
and
that then. I mean, who are your favorite horror authors? So even if you don't feel like they necessarily influence your way of writing, they have at
yeah.
least influenced what you find to be good horror.
Well, I mean, I think anybody's going to tell you Stephen King.
Hmm.
He's got especially his um, Like his short fiction collections have these like they just like evoke this like dark wonder almost of just like what is going on. Like his collection Night Shift has some of like the best horror short stories ever, and they're like Boogeyman and Graveyard Shift. I mix up which other stories are in that one versus Skeleton Crew. But so I definitely say Stephen King. He has a lot of books that have this like what is going on, how do we protect ourselves, or what is going on, how do we escape, what is going on, how do we stop it? And I think the novel It is like one of his best examples of that, where it's not just what's going on. Well, it's vampires, let's stop it. It's like, what is going on? We really don't get it. Like, how do we survive it long enough to figure out how to stop it? So Stephen King's, I would say his first two short story collections, and then It, very much like big influences in the type of horror that I like. And then what else comes to mind? Clive Barker's Hellbound Heart that they made the movie, or he made the movie Hellraiser out of, where it's somebody, using this weird puzzle box that he knows that if he opens it, it'll, give him some sort of crazy pleasure, but then the Cenobites come and torture him for eternity. And then the story starts after that. And so this idea of like something coming from somewhere else that we don't really understand, and it's not heaven or hell, it's I don't know what it is, but now they're after me because I accidentally opened the puzzle box, and what do I do? That's a novella. I think I read that in a sitting, and it just and then I think about um what's his name? Josh Mallerman's Bird Box that they made that Netflix movie out of with Sandra Bullock a few years ago, where the whole actually the movie doesn't do it justice because the movie immediately actually I forgot what they do. The movie tells you what they see, whatever it is. I can't remember. But in the book, some people see something and then they go insane and they start trying to kill everybody around them. But you don't know what it is because if anybody saw it, they wouldn't be able to tell you because they'd be trying to kill you. But I love that aspect in the book, and then even the climax of the book where like um this she's something that's standing over her. She knows something's standing over her. She's getting that sense of how big it is and what it's doing, and it's like tugging at her blindfold. So you're like learning this, like, okay, so it has fingers. Like that's like you're getting these drips of what's going on. And I love that experience. And I think I link it to like I read fantasy a ton as a kid.
Mhm.
And I think when you first read fantasy, either as a kid or if you don't come across fantasy until you're older, um, then like orcs and goblins and dwarves and wizards, and this is all like crazy. You're like, what am I encountering here? And it evokes wonder, which is hard to find as an adult. And not so much like spiritual wonder, but like wonder in seeing something new. And I could go off on a tangent. Like I wrote like a thesis about this, like this idea of wonder, and that um, I think that it evokes like a fear response, but rather than like fight or flight, because you can't do that when you're reading or watching a movie, it doesn't make sense. So you're freezing, which is also a fear response. So you're like simulating a fear response of freezing while you watch this thing that you don't understand what it is. And so it creates this just amazing like emotional experience. And part of me wants to like go study phenomenology and just like write and do everything I can to like understand better these ideas of like the experience of reading something that you've never seen before or watching something you've never seen before. And so with horror, I think there's some fantasy that still does wonder, not comfortable wonder, not okay, let's go back into Middle Earth. I like being there. Let's see some new part of it, but like actual like what is this that I'm looking at? And like Jeff Vandermeer's written some fantasy like that. China Mieville has written some fantasy like that. But I think you more so find it in horror. You find this wonder that you haven't felt since you were a kid watching fantasy or reading fantasy, of like approaching something of like what's in my closet, or what's like why is there a circus tent in the woods, why has the sky opened up with a mouth, why is weird stuff. I think horror is where it's being done. It's also a very big genre, so I'm at a horror convention next to somebody who writes slashers, and we're like, hi, I don't know what to talk to you about because like we have not our books have nothing in common except they're kind of scary. That's why I write horror, because I like that. I like evoking wonder.
Outside of horror, what other books, or I guess any media are you drawing from any kind of influence or just
I don't
inspiration,
know.
or what do you like? What are you
I've been
reading right
reading
now?
Stephen Erickson's Malazan books, and Ian Esselmont, the two writers who write in the same universe. Um, and they're very much, 90s, early 2000s fantasy of like big fantasy world with wars and stuff. But the world that they create is very strange. It's still fantasy with knights and dragons and magic, but like the things are so weird that, well, that I'm
The
sad for.
Malazan Book of the Fallen, is
Hmm.
that
That's
okay?
Steven Erickson's first series in it.
Yeah.
And then Ian Esselman also has a series called, I think, just Books of the Malazan, Tales of the
Hmm.
Malazan Empire, or something like that. They're also good. But the first book in, yeah, Erickson's Malazan Book of the Fallen does not hold your hand at all. You're just thrown into it, into this like super complicated, like political intrigue, but then also
Yeah.
like political intrigue among gods, and then among elder gods, and then among like elder races that are even older than the elder gods. And so it is the most confusing thing to read. But I like that experience, and I seek out sometimes media where I'm like, I don't know what's going on, and they don't really want me to know what's going on, because and I do like to do that in small amounts in my books. I like to do that in like background stuff where you're like, what, why is this happening? Like my circus tent book, he cuts into the tent and it bleeds, and then the people inside are like, you got to give a performance for the tent. So like, the tent is a thing. It's alive in some way, shape, or form, and I never answer it. I never even explore it, because like that's part of the experience of the book, is that like it's like an undertone, almost like a musical undertone of like it's just going to be there the whole time of like,
Hmm.
what is this, like what is happening, like I'm following the plot line of the kid and the dad, or like my fantasy books I'm following the plot line of these guys trying to survive this battle or whatever, but like the undertone is like I'm not grasping totally what is causing all of this. And so that is something I like to play with, that I think I got a lot from Steven Erickson's first Malazan book.
Okay. I have started that. I have I would like to take on that series, but I'm very aware of the fact that it is complicated. There's a lot of videos out there, telling you approaches to reading them and ways to do your best to understand them. So I will take it on at some point. I'm actually in the middle of the Trader Sun cycle, which I don't know if it's meant to be all that confusing, but I'm like always very confused at every point in that. And I'm constantly like trying to find out if there's more information on the internet, and there's not. Not in the same way as, say, like a Wheel of Time, where you can find
Mm.
a wiki that explains everything important about every chapter, because by the 13th book, you really just need something to help you out. Um,
It's tricky too, because you'll look up something and then there'll be a spoiler for like the next
Yes,
book.
I
Yeah.
made that mistake many times. I was like, oh, wait, what?
Blogs on Tor.com sometimes, like they have a read through of the whole Malazan series where you can go chapter by chapter, and like the first thing to do is sum up what happened and kind of explain it
Yeah.
without talking about the future, like just what's happened there and how it relates to the past. It's very helpful sometimes with
Okay, that's good to know, because I
yeah.
will take on that series at some point. I had one more question, and that is just which one of your books would you want to recommend the most, or which one, if someone's not a fan of horror, which one would you recommend to get them into? Or, I don't know, any approach you want to take, give a little shout out of your own little advertisement here.
Well,
130
I assume you're posting this
subscribers I have.
soon-ish, so I'll say like read my book. I found Christmas lights slithering up my street.
Oh, yeah.
It's a Christmas story, and it's kind of a Christmas retelling of Lovecraft's Color Out of Space,
Mm,
which was also made into a movie recently. So it's about some alien thing from under the ground trying to like take over this neighborhood, but it's also got like camouflage ideals, and so it's like camouflaging itself in this tacky lights contest. And so it's a very like vibrant and bizarre horror story that takes place at Christmas and is
mhm.
a little bit about like 90s kid nostalgia Christmas. But also some of my books are kind of disturbing by the end. This one it's a Christmas story, so it's scary throughout, but it won't leave you like wanting to hug your children or something.
And do you have any one of your books that you feel like should be getting more attention? Do you have one that you think is, you know, uh, a
I don't know
better
that like
example?
should like it deserves it or something, but like I always wish my book that was originally titled Boom and is now Those Who Dwell Below the Sidewalk. Um, I just, I spent like a year like creating that world and outlining
Mhm.
before I ever even started writing. And so it's just this crazy world of cults and monsters and magics and everything like interacting with each other. And it was fun to write. And it's
I
not,
I think it was
My
your
most
first book that I read. I really
yeah.
enjoyed Boom, and you certainly can, like you just said, there is a lot of world building in a way that, um, it's not there in the same way as it is in, well, in the I Found Horrors. Those,
Yeah, that one's like toes the line with urban fantasy, so like
right,
blurs the line with urban fantasy. So
yeah.
it's its
But
own thing.
even a Horror Lurks Beneath. What's the first one that it waits at the
It waits on the
top?
top floor.
It waits on the top floor. I mean, that one, you also aren't quite building out the world in the same way. That one is, like you've said, I mean, that's just a big mystery at the center that you are trying to
Yeah.
figure out the whole way. And it also has that psychological element of, exploring his fears, his concerns, his anxieties, and of course the how he feels about his adopted son. But I mean, it's not the same type of world building you have with Boom. And so I was speaking of which, I mean, do you have any interest in revisiting the world of Boom and making a sequel to that, or?
Yeah, I think that would be cool. I think the same with Puppets. I would want it to be a standalone book. Maybe like
Okay.
chronologically it happens next, but it's not like a you have to read this first and then this one. And that's kind of honestly, that's kind of for marketing reasons. Like I want to be able to advertise a book, you can't really
Right.
advertise a sequel very well. But it's also kind of like I've written two sequels. That's all the only sequels I've written, and it's not as fun as here's a whole new idea I'm excited about.
I personally will encourage all of the viewers to check out any of your books. I have liked
Thank you.
all of them that I've read. I still need to finish the Horror Lies Beneath series. You're coming out with so many. I'm so impressed at how quickly you come out with them. Just
Thank you.
like I said, I have the hardest time even just finishing a paper. Um, although I'd like to think that the writing for fiction is a little more pleasurable than getting lost in the labyrinth of
Most of the
footnotes.
time, yeah.
Is there anything else you would like to plug? Let people know where to find you. I'll make sure to put it in the description, or anything else you want to share.
Yeah, just I'm on, social media, author Ben Farthing on Facebook and farthing.ben or ben.farthing on Instagram and TikTok. You search my name, I come up. I'm there.
Okay. Well, thank you for joining me, Ben. It's been great to catch up, but specifically to talk a little bit about books. I love
Yeah.
all things books, as you do as well. And I just want to say to all of our listeners, keep those pages turning. I hope you guys enjoyed that. I obviously had a good time talking to Ben. I really appreciated his insight, especially in the challenges of writing and what it takes to be a full-time author. I'd really like to know what you guys have to say. Maybe you let me know a little bit more about these interviews if you would like to see more of these. Not that I have a whole lot more of author friends, but let me know what you thought of Ben's thoughts on writing, as well as his genre specifically. Please let me know in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, turn on those notifications, and until next time, keep those pages turning.